Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into what is literally the ultimate blueprint of human survival and resource allocation, population geography. You know, people are a country's real wealth. It's the people who actually make use of a region's resources and ultimately shape its destiny. But, as we're going to see today, humanity's footprint on this planet is, well, it's anything but even.
I want you to consider a pretty staggering question. Why on earth do 90% of humans squeeze themselves into just 10% of the Earth's land? It's this massive global disparity, and to really wrap our heads around it, we need to zoom in on how we live right now, and then zoom all the way out to see exactly where the human race is heading.
So let's jump right into Section 1, the global population puzzle.
Okay, let's look at this wildly uneven distribution. Population distribution, which is basically just how we humans are spaced out across the planet, is incredibly lopsided. Broadly speaking, 90% of the world's population lives in just about 10% of its land area. Think about that. The vast majority of our planet is virtually empty of human settlement, while a tiny fraction is absolutely packed to the brim.
And if we break that down by country, the concentration gets even crazier. The 10 most populous nations in the world hold about 60% of the entire global population. And here's the real kicker. Of those top 10 countries, 6 of them are located in Asia. So a massive chunk of the human race is clustered into just a handful of nations, with Asia holding the lion's share.
The geographer George B. Cressy actually hit the nail on the head with this. He said it beautifully. Asia has many places where people are few and few places where people are very many. And you know, while he was talking specifically about Asia, that quote perfectly sums up the pattern of population distribution for the entire world.
Which brings us to Section 2, where and why we live. Why do we actually choose to settle where we do? Before we get into the why, we've got to talk about the how much. You see, every single patch of land has a strict limit to how much life it can support. To figure out that limit, we look at population density. It's just a simple ratio. The number of people divided by the size of the land, usually measured in persons per square kilometer. So what makes one square kilometer support thousands of people, while another supports literally 0?
Well, it all starts with the geographical foundation. Think of it like a giant puzzle where humans are building their ideal habitat layer by layer. The absolute, non-negotiable piece for survival? Fresh water. It's exactly why river valleys are just teeming with life. Next up, flat landforms, like the incredibly dense Ganga Plains. Flat land is just so much easier for growing crops and building roads, whereas mountainous zones, like the Himalayas, are super scarce. Toss in a comfortable, mild climate without extreme seasons, like the Mediterranean, plus some fertile, loamy soils for intense farming, and boom, you've got the perfect recipe for a human settlement.
But nature isn't the only magnet here. When you add economic and social layers, you start to see exactly why modern life looks the way it does. Minerals attract massive mining and industrial operations, which means jobs, like the Katanga-Zambia copper belt. Industrialization creates these giant employment hubs, drawing in factory workers, sure, but also doctors, teachers, and shopkeepers. You can see this beautifully in the Kobe, Osaka region of Japan. And then there's urbanization. The promise of better schools and civic amenities is exactly why our modern megacities draw millions of people every single year. Oh, and of course, we flock to places of cultural significance and political stability, deliberately steering clear of areas with unrest.
All right, now that we know where we live, let's move on to Section 3, the math of human growth, and see how our numbers actually change.
So, here is a crucial distinction. There's a huge difference between strict biological growth and what's actually happening on the ground. Natural growth is strictly biological. That's just births minus deaths. But actual growth, that paints the whole messy picture of human movement. It's births minus deaths plus the people moving in minus the people moving out. You absolutely have to account for that migration to know how an area is truly changing. To track all of this, demographers rely on some pretty straightforward math. You have the crude birth rate, which is live births per 1,000 people, and the crude death rate, which is deaths per 1,000 people. But here's a pretty surprising takeaway for you. Population growth isn't always because of a massive surge in babies being born. Nope. Often, a population explodes simply because social and medical advancements cause the death rate to absolutely plummet.
That covers births and deaths, but what about moving around? Let's check out Section 4, why we move, focusing entirely on migration.
Migration is essentially this spontaneous effort we make to find a better balance between ourselves and our resources. When people move, the place they leave is the place of origin, and where they land is the place of destination. And there's a fascinating little paradox here. Every single person who moves is actually an emigrant and an immigrant at the exact same time. They emigrate out of their origin, dropping that population, and immigrate into their destination, bumping those numbers up.
This movement is driven by a massive global tug-of-war between push and pull factors. Push factors are the negative forces that make where you live unbearable. Think unemployment, political turmoil, natural disasters, or epidemics. You're quite literally pushed out. On the flip side, pull factors are what make a new destination irresistible. We're talking better jobs, peace, stability, security, or even just a pleasant climate. You're pulled in. It's a constant balancing act happening all over the world. Let's zoom way, way out now and look at the overarching trajectory of humanity in Section 5, the demographic transition.
This demographic transition theory basically describes how societies fundamentally evolve. Imagine jumping back 200 years. Pretty much every country was in stage 1. We're talking highly vulnerable agrarian societies battling epidemics and totally unpredictable food supplies. That meant super high birth rates, but equally high death rates, so overall growth was agonizingly slow. Then comes stage 2. Suddenly, we get better sanitation and healthcare, so the mortality rate drops like a stone, but fertility remains high. That gap right there, that causes a massive population boom. Eventually, we hit stage 3. Societies become urbanized, highly literate, and tech-savvy. Both birth and death rates drop significantly. The population finally stabilizes because families deliberately control their size, which really just goes to show how incredibly adaptable humans are.
Which leads us right into our final section, our future trajectory. How do we manage the limits of this growth? Because we are so adaptable, we can actually implement population control measures. Family planning is a real game changer here, not just for limiting growth, but for genuinely improving women's health. Access to contraceptives, raising awareness, or even tax disincentives for larger families. These all act as incredibly powerful preventive measures. We don't just have to sit back and let nature ruthlessly balance our numbers. Policy and family planning actually allow us to deliberately prevent those unsustainable population spikes.
And honestly, the importance of this becomes terrifyingly clear when you look at Thomas Malthus's theory from way back in 1798. Malthus mapped out a pretty grim timeline for us. First, he said human populations will always increase faster than the food supply. Second, our resources will be completely exhausted. And third, and this is the scary part, physical checks will violently correct the population through a devastating crash caused by famine, disease, and war. Yeah, not great. Clearly, stepping in with preventive checks and smart policies is vastly superior to waiting for those devastating physical checks to wipe us out.
So, as we wrap our heads around the fact that 90% of us are clustered onto just 10% of the land, and that our numbers have blown past 6 billion, I want to leave you with this final, lingering thought. For the sake of our resources and our survival, will our preventive checks, our urbanization, and our human adaptability save us and stabilize the globe? Or are we ultimately barreling toward a Malthusian crash? It's literally the ultimate demographic puzzle, and how we solve it is going to define the future of the human race. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.